Hi, everybody. My name is Silas Grant. I'm a postdoctoral scholar at UC Irvine, and I have the honor of introducing our panelists today for a discussion about protecting the Greater Chaco landscape. So I'll let everybody introduce themselves, but just what briefly we have Daniel So, former Navajo Nation Council delegate, Julia Bernal, Executive Director of Pueblo Action Alliance, and Mario Atencio, a PhD student at UNM. And we're really looking forward to this discussion and sharing with you. Why don't we do some quick introductions, and then Mario and I will bring the discussion a bit, and then we have a few questions for the panelists to cycle through, and then we're looking forward to having some discussion with you too. So I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself, Daniel.
Yeah, Julia Daniel So, she도 생기는 소원을 같이 와서 시키는 스페셜 치고 하는 있습니다. 침대 치는 거. 그리고 not named June or community for other grades. I was sort of on Nation Council in 3 terms, 1986, 1995, and then 2019, 2023. So unique, I guess, I would say, resume.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julia Bernal. I am from San Diego Pueblo. That's where my current location and tribal enrollment is, but I'm also Yuchi from Oklahoma, and I am the Executive Director of Pueblo Action Alliance. Happy to be here, especially with all the folks at this table, because we've been working on issues relating to protecting Greater Chaco for a really long time now, and it's always a great opportunity to share that work with diverse audiences. So thank you all for being here. And I'll pass it to Mario.
Nara here, especially the Schlet Hodetini, a fascist chain, Kanazani, Dashi, Kashi, Dashi, Nelly, not in Jean. Isaac Kirst, bro. Cast is got Eros the Melody. Aros Deano. Mario Atencio, the Natalie, my clan, born for Bitter Water Clan. Orion, New Mexico, basically a 3rd year PhD student at the University of New Mexico. Appreciate all of you coming out up here trying to make sure that the screensaver doesn't come on. So, okay, well, I'll probably be able to just make sure it doesn't go out. I'll turn this back on. Technology always fails on this. Don't trust it, especially AI. But we'll get us back to Professor Grant.
Yeah, thanks so much. So as Julia mentioned, we've all been working together along with many, many other people on this work of protecting the Greater Chaco landscape for a long time. And the occasion that kind of brought us here today is that we recently co-authored a chapter for that's coming out in a book that will be out soon that is called "What You Do to the Earth, You Do to the People," which is the theme of today's discussion. And so we're here really to talk about what we reflect on in that chapter and our ongoing discussions. One of our co-authors, Samuel Sage, who's the Community Services Coordinator at Counselor Chapter, is not able to make it here. I have the privilege of sharing his name tag, so just wanted to give a shout out to Samuel and also to all of the land protectors and water protectors that we work in solidarity with, and who some of them may be watching, because this is work that is definitely part of a big movement. Pass it over to Mario to say a few more words, and we'll get into questions.
More on framing, we're seeing a lot of this work is community-based research. We're always talking about placing our analyses away from the metropole and placing it back into community. And so community-based participatory research, we're not the experts. We are flattening out the expert level, and we're going to places where knowledge is created. I think in sort of like the critical anthropology, that's even a word we can say with Dr. writing in here, is that they're moving towards this idea that activism is generating the knowledge. And it's an attack upon the academy itself when it says that they're all about knowledge production, you know? And so that we are creating the knowledge over here as the thinkers and the theorists. Oh, I think we're being practical practices of placing analyses of the knowledge development here with the people. And there's a number of ways that we're attacking very serious questions. Protection of sacred sites, knowledge generation. There's a whole myriad. We can't think about it all the time, but those are just some that I see that we're influencing, and we're seeing, especially in terms of the fight against global climate change. The people on the ground have created something very powerful, and hopefully you'll see that in our discussion today. So I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. And I think just to sort of set the scene and ground us in the greater Chaco landscape, we were going to watch just a couple minutes of a film that we all produced along with many other people called Our Story, the Indigenous Led Fight to Protect Greater Chaco. So we'll just watch the first 2.5 minutes or so.
Right now, our view is water is more valuable than oil and gas. It's a precious gift. And the main aspect in our work, we're trying to keep the mega corporations accountable. This what they're doing now, taking the oil and the gas. It's short term. It won't sustain them, as is being demonstrated right now. The privileged folks come. Well, why don't you just move? Why don't they just move? This is our homeland. We're following instructions from the holy people. Time of emergence. This is your land. The secret mountains. Cisnachinet. Tzotzil. Tokonsli. Atencio. Cisnautili. Zilchonti. That's your Hogan. That's your home. And we want to stay here. Some of the statements we've said is, oh yeah, these development companies, they'll come and go. But you know what? Navajo people will still be here. And that's the part that has to be understood.
If you're interested in watching more, that film is available and we can information about that afterwards. So with that, we're gonna kick off our discussion. So the theme of our panel today and the chapter that we co-wrote, as I mentioned, is what you do to the earth, you do to the people. This is a teaching that came out of Matriarchs in Eastern Navajo Agency, where this fight is grounded and really began. I think you'll be hearing more about that. But for the first question, I wanted to invite folks to reflect on what this means to you and how it has guided your work.
Thank you. What, yeah. It all started with this newfounded technology, hydraulic fracturing. Eastern Navajo Agency, 31 chapters, there's a lot. And back in the 70s into the mid-80s, there was a legal fight. And the Department of Interior relented and basically said allotment owners own the mineral right. Before a lot of papers said gold reserved to the U.S. government. And the older folks, one of my chains of grandpeople, basically led the fight. So in that aspect, fast forward to 2009, WPX, the Tulsa-based international oil company, started selecting parcels of land. In those parcels existed allotments. And they held community meetings here and there to get allotment shareholders to sign. Also, Oklahoma, they already know how to deal with allotment owners. So to get the signature, allotment shareholders were offered a signing bonus. And naturally with high unemployment, lack of access to certain services, people find. And in that aspect, there was really no full interpretation. Some of the signers thought this amount, the bonus, was going to come every month. The actual lease papers that were given to them, it was a 1964 form titled the Oil and Gas Lease Agreement. Right-of-ways for roads, electricity pipeline were included. The surface acreage was agreed to at $2 an acre. Whereas other people that raised those allotments, they had to pay anywhere from $4 to $6 to eat the grass and whatnot for their cattle. So it was, I guess, a calling. The community of Shelter Chapter. They sent word, we want you to come. And there was a whole room full. They asked me to sit up along with the chapter office. And people talk and ask. made statement in one of the memos. Gosh, my little one, you've been a leader before. Can you help us? And the other matriarchs talked. I would have never signed a lease if I knew that these trucks were gonna be into a community. The whole vertical, it comes to oil. We're all walking around like a John Wayne movie. So getting black with oil. This is perfect. So, my response was, what you know of this hydraulic fracture is about this big. And there's only a few of us against this mega corporation. Our influence politically is even small. Will you give us permission to go outside and find out what exactly is hydraulic fracturing? Nakatawidosh actually told, I guess it was 880. I can check out they do this. Grandmas. It wasn't a chapter meeting. It didn't call for a motion or a second or a vote. It was a community meeting. Those grandmas all nodded. So I just said, give me time. Give us time. Within 2 weeks, another meeting. What did you find out? What's the plan? So I says, we're going to bring in some groups. After that meeting, then we had within the chapter house or the stove, we gathered, reached out to Foundation, Levinson Foundation, Water Guardian, in their care, like Diesel Water Coalition. And so we scheduled a date. Of course, Black Diesel Water Coalition has been in these types of fights for quite a long time. And so we scheduled a new gathering. And that's where they brought in people from the Bakken oil fields, Montana, and then the lead activist with the tar sands, Alberta, Canada. We overcome muscle. Of course, Candy Monson. Not only Candy Monson, it's Candy White. They came down. And they showed their films. And that's where the grab must. We got to do something. So through my prior experience, I wrote a resolution for the 3 chapter counselor operation for seeking congressional intervention, seeking changes to the rules and authorities that govern these areas. So in other act, environment groups, the Earth also started from at the time, the baby organization of
so I think for us, I mean, I'm Pueblo Indigenous, and so as a baby organization, I mean, we were literally in year one, coming out of the Standing Rock movement and learning so much from that mobilization, that global mobilization of Indigenous people to protect water and respect treaty rights and just Indigenous rights in general. Brought that experience and that activism back into our own homelands. And as Pueblo people and descendants of our Pueblo ancestors, getting involved with the efforts to protect Chaco Canyon was, of course, a spiritual and cultural stake, but part of the beautiful thing of being in intergenerational spaces and working together alongside other Indigenous tribes is the learning aspect. And so we learned the adverse impacts of oil and gas that it does to public health and the environment, and learned more about the environmental justice movement that was really birthed out of New Mexico. The famous principles of democratic organizing are those environmental justice principles that are still utilized to this day. All of that learning came out of getting involved in this effort to not just protect Chaco Canyon, but protect the greater Chaco landscape and addressing the impacts of oil and gas and impacts to frontline communities. And sort of building off of what Dr. Harjo was speaking to in terms of geography and movement, I think that the Pueblo advocacy and the Pueblo Dene solidarity that has been built amongst this grassroots movement is that geography in motion, or geography in movement, because, you know, I, as a Pueblo person from Sandia, you know, I'm 3.5 hours drive away from Chaco Canyon, our site, but there is that historic and generational lineage to that place because that's where our ancestors were and where our ancestors built this thriving economy, World Trade Center, if you will, because so many Indigenous peoples have migrated and traveled in and out of that area. We are in this place of privilege to continue that tradition of going and migrating to Chaco and sharing information, sharing food, sharing knowledge, and building that relationality and kinship with each other, is really the experience, if I were to sum it up in a few words, that I gained from, you know, doing this work 8 years later. It's been a while, guys. And recognizing that they had been doing this work long before we came in, but it is a bittersweet reflection to recognize that while there's so much injustice happening in a very important and sacred landscape, it is also bringing us together. So.
Yeah. So our chapter, the lead off chapter in the compilation, the end of extraction, the title is "What You Do to the Earth, You Do to the People." I think that's, and so the meeting, like my grandpa shared, Daniel was talking about, those 8 grandmas all sat next to the fire inside Council Chapter. Each one stood up and said why we need to stop doing it. I think the very last one, she synthesized the whole discussion. And she said, what you do to the people, you do, or what you do to the earth, you do to the people. And so what's happening out there, it's not good. And so that's the main marching order. You ever hear marching orders ever in Model society? And it's not you go create an environmental justice movement, and go and then put me a part of your steering committee. No, it was very very, the stuff in the subtext, when they asked the former council delegate to activate his powers, very important to mark that. It's relationality, it's found in indigenous resurgence. And the main thing we can probably say, using peacemaking. At the meeting, after that meeting that happened, those grandmas said that we maybe met the next week at the chapter house, in 5 of us. Samuel Say, Daniel So, Cheyenne Antonio, Marlene Thomas, Community Health Representative, CHR, met there, said, what are we gonna do? And I said, in there, I said, and fresh out of AIS, my Master's of Science, just newly graduated, 2015. In there, I said, from there, we were marking just how much the I don't know more movement sparked change all across Canada and the world, especially in the United States. And we were saying, I said, this is going to spark something. It's going to be a very important movement. And in there, we're not going to be the peacekeepers, we're going to be the peacemakers. And we're going to rise in prominence. And we're going to catch all kinds of criticism from companies, United States government. Worst one is probably going to be our people. And so not only that, but then all these organizations will come and they're going to co-opt what we're doing, exploit us. But even though that's going to happen, we're going to have to let it happen, just so our message can spread. This is 2015 October. So that's what we're going to have to do. The 98, my mom and dad didn't sign the lease in 2013 because I said there's something horribly wrong with how this process is going. It's not done right. And so that is the ultimate. You start looking deep into business resurgence and seeing this big discussion in AIS about comparative, that we just look at American Indian studies, Native American studies, Indigenous studies. This is an ultimate example of comparative when we're going international. We're marking stuff that's happening with Lubicon Massimo coming down, telling us that the tar sand fights, which ultimately led to Standing Rock, right? Very important to see that, and that exchange of knowledge forms this new idea, at least I write in the chapter, is that we are forming peacemaking as a process, as a sovereign relationality, not centering colonization. Something different that we're doing. In Navajo thought we're doing something very unique. And so trying to market through this. So really like this part of the next question, but hopefully it helps. That's like what we're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for your responses. And I think you've already begun to really touch on the next question, which is about how, one of the remarkable things to come out of this movement is the Diné Pueblo solidarity that you were describing, Julia, and also the solidarity and relationships that have been built between Indigenous communities and environmental groups, and the challenges of that at times. And so wanted to invite you to reflect more on kind of on relationship building and movement building, both within and across Indigenous communities and with people from outside.
Yeah, thank you. We can't do this alone in the vacuum space. We have to. Whoever comes out, we need to have them. You can't discredit just how important what these young, powerful people that came to Council Chapter, they brought a dear stew to us. it was 7 young ladies, 7 young people. They came, young matriarchs, they came in and they said, we want to talk for the community. Is it okay? And all the people in the council that came and they ate, and said, yes, okay. It's like, that is very important. It's, I don't know if it's a peace treaty, but it's very important because they still can taste that stew, red chili, beer stew with the bread. That is a wonderful way to go about doing the mission. It created so much connection that has moved, and we saw that the current divisive narrative coming out of certain parts of Navajo are saying, well, Pueblo just want to take over the land. And that's this what happened just really throws that on its head. And so it's important piece of power, because we know that that landscape isn't that at certain moments, certain clan groups in Navajo society are Pueblo. And by simple logic, Navajo people are partly ancestral Pueblo. And we do have to recognize that on a deep level, that the whole landscape is an important piece of our deep cultural sovereignty as a people. Just north of Chaco is Largo Canyon, the Netca. Isso oli, isso Netca. Isso Netca, no. Deeply sacred landscape. The creation of the Ned Nation is right there. Has to be protected. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you for the question. I guess and Jay, thank you for bringing up the net. Some of the archaeological sites on top of those mesas of the net, Mesa, Largo area. A good number of the archaeological sites are round shaped. And there's some that got the Hogan archaeological places, and then there are square and rectangular sites. And what our recognition is Navajo, so high from the Spaniards after the revolt. And way down south of Orion, Big Mesa. A mesa where there's no way to climb the mesa. There are 80 sites along about 45 square rectangular sites. So we know pre-Columbian, into a period that existed before U.S. cavalry ever came into the partnership. Early on, Navajo people would attend the feast days and the dance. There was very much good interaction, exchange. So the barley, sheep for blue cornmeal, blue corn, the pumpkins and the squash, early on. So those, it existed and it still exists. And it's a very strong bond. So I want to go back to allotment. It was this government way of passing down a lot to the next surviving person or generation. And so some of the allotments, like I got, and it took 51% or more of the signatures to approve an oil and gas. And I went to the land agent from WPX. I'm not going to sign. Well, let's see. Your census number, and he pulled up. And he kind of smirked. We already got 72% on this allotment, 91%, 110, 117. And we get over 100%. Well, some of the signatories have bigger shares. On one, just okay. So 10% would be 0.1, right? One share that I have is 0.002. That's a lot of people on that allotment paper. On another one, it's 0.3 zeros before there's a 2. 1/10,000th a share. Wow. So anyway, that's the type of system that we was passed down with this allotment act. And so in the General Allotment Act that is passed with the Homestead Act, the Taylor Grazing Act, the intent and purpose to Christianize. Says that on the act. So that's the part that's the aspect of it that holds now. And it's been quite the tough part. And so what I'm trying to say is this in their level of solidarity, they help each other. And that's a very good area. The other stories that grandmas and grandpas passed is that when Kit Carson and the U.S. cavalry came through, it was the Hamas people, Hamas Pueblo. Where the Navajos, certain families were taken in and taken back to the old Pueblo, while they couldn't allow the cavalry to go in. Had to protect it from Navajos. And that's not in print, that's not in, it's in the stories that are passed down. So those aspects are, and the bigger narrative, we have a fight between Navajos and Pueblos over Chaco Canyon. So that aspect I really wanted to emphasize. And if I may, I'd like to just go back to the story. When we got permission to go, there's one former Aztec school administrator that lives in Santa Fe. Her name is Teresa C. This is how you establish a health impact assessment. And so we formed the health impact assessment. We got the first part of the study, the HIA, pretty much complete. And then we had a distinguished Navajo environmentalist, Dr. Larry Emerson, came. He basically said, hey, this is fine, Dan. What if we look at this assessment from our Navajo cultural lens? And so that's where this, it was first titled, Ojona, and then as we conversed more on that, then it became Cafe Ina Salah. And so, and that was authorized by the Research Review Board. And it took a while to get it approved. In the meantime, before that, in 2015, a distinguished Indigenous activist with the Sierra Club called me one day and said, "Hey, Bernal, I've got a person from Sierra Club coming in. Can you go drive us around to go to the website?" Sure. Went out to the 7 oil sites, and the person, she doesn't mind me using her name. Lena Moffett, Dirty Fuels campaigner at the time of Sierra Club. They came, she's raised in Albuquerque. And they came out, and her mom was along. And so we went to the oil sites. Basically, Lena's mom says, this thing is quite unique. Are you going to continue it? And I said, I really haven't thought about it, but I guess I will. And she said, can I offer a name? I said, sure. I'll put it into the pool and we'll see who gets the and she offered, can I offer the fracking, it's fracking reality to it. And then, so I said, when you put in reality, you must be part of the 60s movement. And she screamed, yeah, okay, name will stick. So, and in other places, they follow that model. They call theirs the toxic tour. From there, that's where the aspect of the formation of the Greater Chaco Coalition. One of the aspects that came at a meeting at the Atencio chapter, person from the Wilderness Society displayed a map over in the Chaco region. Wilderness Society had decided to call that the protection zone. And the counselor and areas outside as the development zone. And my first response was, what are you talking about? This development zone, you don't even show where the people live. Why are you doing it? And here, I guess it was a long-standing BOMBIA action that they were leasing lands within that protection zone that had started leasing where people live. And that's been, I guess, a whole basis for this action. When we first started moving, using some of the old skills, we'll have a legislative working group, we'll have a news working group, and we'll have community group. And those were the subgroups that we developed. And of course, when that HIA KBIS was finally approved by the quote unquote Navajo IRB. In there, they gave us permission to use the HLA. Take it to Congress, take it to the state legislature. Use it to change regulations before you. And I don't think that any other research group that have been authorized by the Navajo IRB has to be given that technique. And my shade from this idea about we need to do something like standing rock. Let's go protest, let's be other people saying, let's lay down the road, block the trucks. And my response was, hey, we're not gonna do like that. We're gonna take it to the level of having respect so that we can go into the congressional offices and not be labeled as radicals. We're going to be looking at them and we want to be at the table. And guess what? Years down the line, when Che was named into a methane task force, and he influenced the adoption of the methane rules that are enforced by the BLM and the BLM. So those types of things we made progress on. We had news people coming. They put their own spin on how they saw what we were doing. One of the first young people that came, he's an independent journalist, wrote for the Santa Fe Reporter. Took her on the fracking tour. Her article was titled Fractured Community. And it went online within 24 hours. That story had 63,000 hits. So we kept going. Again, when certain people, they put their own spin, and so then this idea of we have to tell our own story is what came about. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I think we have one more question for the panelists, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So the last question is, kind of reflecting on this movement, this coalition has had a lot of successes that, Daniel referenced some of them, and I invite you in your responses to reference more. And at the same time, we're in this moment right now of increased political polarization and likely, quote unquote, unleashing American energy dominance. And so I wanted to invite you to share your thoughts on kind of how you're thinking about the challenges moving forward and how do we, build a movement to build the world that we want and need. So we'll start with Julia.
Yeah, thanks, Silas. Well, I feel like, and this is kind of tying in a lot of what has already been said, but as an organization, we have had the privilege to align the Greater Chaco movement on a global Indigenous scale, really, and we find that so much of the fight that is happening globally is very similar. Indigenous peoples occupying land to protect sacred sites, to protect biodiversity, to protect culture, and you find alignment, and you build that relationality, and you strengthen those relationships with each other. Again, referring back to Dr. Harjo, you're building that relational infrastructure. And that in itself, I think, is a huge success out of this movement, because even until this day, we find ourselves facing obstacles and tactics like divide and conquer, that ultimately is utilized for us to participate in infighting amongst each other. And, you know, Mario and Daniel were speaking to pieces of history that aren't told or recorded in like books or academia or whatever. And so we're literally fighting against a sort of revisionist history, and recognizing that misinformation is also a tactic that is used to divide us. And that's what colonization has done a really good job of. You know, we learn about the good parts of history, or, oh, you know, we moved the natives from here to here and they like gladly conceded and, you know, everything was all good. It's like, no, there was genocide, there was displacement, and there was erasure, and there was assimilation. And so when we have those opportunities to come together with other Indigenous peoples, we start to unravel and undo that misinformation that's being perpetuated by colonial structures and institutions. And that is a success, I think, for what is to come, because as Silas mentioned, there is this doubling down of extraction happening in this administration. You know, moving from renewable energy initiatives to going back to drill, baby, drill. And so, you know, we have a lot of work ahead of us, because so much of this administration, really specific language, is to undo the successes of the Chaco movement. So under the last administration, we saw Secretary Holland, who is a person from the Pueblo Laguna, you know, really model meaningful tribal consultation, but also meaningful community consultation, because, you know, we're not representing big government or tribal government up here. We're representing our communities and ourselves. And so, you know, that is also incorporating like the community-based activism and advocacy and principles of environmental justice, because frontline communities, Indigenous communities that are impacted adversely by extractive industries should and always should have a say in their future, in how land is going to be developed. And that's just point blank. But to wrap things up on our end, I think an important thing that we can't forget in this work is that we have to organize around our traditional value systems. You know, Daniel in the beginning of that film talks about the importance of water. And we look at the No Dapple movement, the Water is Life movement. Water is what brought the global Indigenous community together. And I'm always having to be reminded that, you know, we can kind of get tripped up or a little narrow-sighted with like policy or, you know, ways in which rules and regulatory systems can address adverse environmental and public health impacts. But ultimately, what we need to be doing as Indigenous leaders in this movement is to reinforce those ideas that our traditional values and our original instructions are to guide us in our decision-making processes, so that way we are making those right decisions that the future generations will benefit from.
Challenges, peacemaking as a motive of relationality, business resurgence. Using that as an analysis tool. Right now, I can see there's some of the stuff I'm reading, especially Glenn Kuzard and Redskin White Mask, is that the identity politics being played to hide the next challenges are going to be the sovereignties. Idea of sovereignty itself is the main challenge. What evidence do we see of that? Navajo Nation just filed lawsuit against Deborah Howland last year. Navajo Nation versus Deborah Howland to repeal executive secretarial order to put a 10-mile buffer zone around Chaco. Using our own words against us. We kept saying the failure to consult with us, honor our sovereignties, environmental justice. You read in that lawsuit, they're using everything we've said for the past 10 years. They co-opted. So the duplicitous nature of law is actually being used against us. And more, I start agreeing with, the old scholar. Why the lawyer says law school is gonna make you stupid. You think litigation is the only way out. Here, we're starting to see very clear that the identity politics and the asymmetries of power develop that hide the true international statehood nationhood movement that's supposed to encompass the Navajo Nation as an idea is being subverted by this Indian self-determination. And so those are the main challenges already. It's not somewhere in the future, it's like today. That's what we're seeing. And if you look at it, again, our grandpa scholar says self-determination, the indistinguishable part that Ada Deer fought during termination was that the cultural expression is indistinguishable as a sovereign process. Navajo is working against its own cultural sovereignty by doing this. There's an ethnographic report from Navajo medicine men themselves that say no more leasing. And so it's backwards, it's twisted, colonial manipulations, the colonial mirror, as I think, is this Burkhart? Yes, Burkhart. So we have to look to the heretical thinkers like Brian Burkhart and Indigenous philosophizing through the land and seeing that we have to go and mark how delocality, the Western way of delocality ill fits upon the epistemic locality of our worlds. So the grounded normativity, place-based knowledge, it doesn't fit with Western colonial thinking. It doesn't fit right into the world. We have to mark that as thinkers and mark it and change it. And so as I see what we're explaining up here, peacemaking as that new way, as not the new way, as a way of thinking can do that, can shine a very clear, specific light on how those manipulations are distorting reality. I think that's what we're going on into the future. It's now. It's literally now. You have to write about it. Again, great sacred grandmother, Cook Lynn, sacred duty to write. It's hard because I want to get out there. I want to go talk in front of the legislatures and try to demand that they hear us. It's hard to be a practice. To do that and really mark what we're doing here and saying we have to create with a theorize, and not just theorize, but theorize. I see Cliff in the audience. Don't just theorize and philosophize and do all that and sit here while you're in the great metropolitan area of the nation and just think you're doing something, but actually make it real. So a quick that, so hopefully that helps. So Chase want to do that.
Okay, well, I guess, in the formation of this Greater Chaco Coalition, the allies wanted to basically say, we need a president, we need a vice president, and I says, no, we're not going to do that. Everybody's going to have a voice. So in that aspect, we move forward. And so in those spaces, my expression of progress, we say, keep it in the ground, frack no more. but we haven't accomplished anything. We haven't stopped one well from being drilled. How can we say we made progress? Just about that time, maybe 30 days later, Mario and the rest of the NACARE Board of Directors, they had well arguing case in the 9th Circuit Court, was it?
Tenth.
Or 10th Circuit Court. The judge ordered that 119 wells would not be built, will not be drilled. So in that aspect, we did make progress. We did make progress to protect the sacred sites. We did make progress to start addressing environmental justice issues for people of communities that are marginalized, that can't get electricity or water, even though funding is available there. So those aspects we continued. And of course, one of the, so people have heard our work. And one, and I know she won't mind me saying her name, Dr. Carmelita, chief from NAU. She took me aside at one conference and said, hey, one thing I see is activists come in and parachuting, they meet, they leave. And we did this, you know. They say we accomplished this. I see that happening with researchers too, coming in, harvesting data and going. But what we need is the researchers to really connect with the community. We need the environmental organizations to really connect with the community members. And right now, the scenario is these are the bad people. And the oil and gas developers are the good people. So in that aspect, going forward, and Mario testified in Washington, D.C., and really it put them on their heels again. The oil and gas industry, but here comes the change and the lawsuit. And what I see is 1923, tribal government was formed. But the Indian Allotment Act was adopted in the late 1880s, and some of the allotment papers that our folks have are 1915, 1912, 1920. So those allotments predate the formation of them. And one of the things that really is the Eastern Agency in tribal code is listed as Indian country jurisdiction. That means 638 contract monies can just be used for education, judicial services, public safety. Self-determination isn't self-determination. It's just a contract. A tribal contract that basically says we can do a better job of the US government, so give us that contract. And then here comes tribal consultation. Government comes, here's our plan for you. What do you think about it? Yes or no? And so there has to be a movement to be an equal. Have a seat at the table. Let's start working on collegiality. We're just as empowered with the brains and with the voice to speak for our communities, for our people, using our language, our cultural values. And that's where this grandma that said, what you do for the roots, you do for the people. And we have ceremonial leaders that basically ask me to attend a function. And they will song a kitchen home. People caught in the net, and that if you harm the earth, you harm the people. And they themselves says, look what happened with uranium mining. Look what happened to the coal mining. Look at those communities. And now we have oil and gas, this new science, we're going into hydrogen. We have to keep cultural values strong. So in that aspect, yes, we have those folks that are doing the whatever's going on in Washington, D.C., but it's keep centered. So those are things that I guess I'm put in certain situations, and certainly, again, it can't be done alone. And that's how come we go out, how to expand the message that we really appreciate you coming and listening, and hopefully we come away with new thoughts and new endeavors. Thank you.
Give the panelists a hand. We have a few minutes if anyone would like to ask some questions. I'll bring the mic around.
Sincerity, veteran, and your knowledge of the subject matter, especially from a cultural context. So I think that's critical for our future. And Mario, you're talking about peacemaker courts as a peacemaker tradition as a possible way to resolve these issues. But peacemakers between disputing parties, and I think the purpose is to establish balance and harmony. So who else going to fall under this model that you propose? And the oil companies going to be subjected to it? Ideally, I would hope so, but what are the chances of them taking any advice or recommendation from grassroots people?
So, peacemaking, they say, hey, not okay. And so it's not like a formal tribunal type system. It's reinforcing kinship onto people. And so it drives us to go into places and to say, even though you're alien people, the outsiders, we're going to take action to stop what you're doing in consideration of those plant species that are actually being affected by oil and gas drilling. And so peacemaker is, it's a not okay. Not okay. Things are going to be pushed back into wellness, well-being, forcing it that way by taking action. And so when we say we stop the oil and gas well, by talking and standing, standing in place of the earth sometimes. That's what we're talking about. So it's a deep, it's a paradigm from deep. And so more and more, then it starts maybe moving into jurisprudence and using the courts. And I think at some points it starts, probably in our analysis, we have to go back and start saying, maybe it's working how you're saying. It's between parties, yes, but then trees do have standing. And the mycorrhizae in the soils have standing. And the baby ants have standing. And so that's forcing it there too. It's really pushing on the holistic level. Hopefully that helps, Professor.
Well, the, alguém entende patriarcha algo mexendo good afternoon. Thank you for the good history lesson and good insights that you have developed as the Chaco Coalition. We really appreciate it as Pueblo people from Acoma. Julia and Mario for several years. Mr. So, thank you for your elder outlook, tradition in our culture. But I think what we learned here today was, the old cliche, history repeats itself. As you stated, the Navajo tribal government was formed because of oil and gas development back in the 1920s when Chief Dodge became the first chairman. And they developed chapters throughout the Navajo Nation. That was initiated because of oil development. And then as we move forward through history, in the 50s and 60s, when the uranium leases were developed and the initiative toward uranium development happened in our backyard too, at Bernal Pueblo, which facilitated the Chaco mine, the largest open pit mine in North America. We see that again, the grassroots people were ignored in the whole inclusion of this initiative, of this development process. And as it accelerated into the 60s to the development of coal gasification and oil and gas, back when I was a youth, which was a long time ago, and I worked with the National Indian Youth Council. I worked with John Redhouse, and your statement up there, Roberta Blackgoat, I remember from Big Mountain, that's almost exactly what you had up on the screen. To destroy the land is to destroy the people. And at that time, John became an inspiration for me to do this work. And we worked with the people at Big Mountain, as you know, who were opposing the development at Black Mesa. And we saw that solidarity, much like you young people and people in the greater Chaco Coalition have brought together when traditional Hopi and Navajo people came together. Thomas Benyata, David Manani, all the grandmothers from Big Mountain, I mentioned Roberta Blackgoat, Catherine Smith, and others formed that solidarity against the coal development. But again, I guess my long-winded question is, how do we get the tribal government to understand our Deneta? We hear walk in beauty, but we have over 1,000 abandoned uranium mines that haven't been cleaned up. Threatening our water sources, as you said, to open the segment, water is life. Not only our underground water systems, but our surface tributaries, as you say, in Deneta, the sacred rivers, the San Juan, the Colorado, all those are endangered rivers right now. So we look at this history lesson, and we come to the current time period and what we're dealing with, the colonial laws, like you mentioned, and allotment. And it should be a history lesson that we have learned from the grassroots people to oppose this development process.
but yet the ultimate dividing factor is economics, the money. The wool that they pull over our eyes in the form of jobs, right? That is convincing this segment of allottees to destroy Kush, as we call Chaco Canyon and Acoma. And we have an oral history that still ties us to that place.
Yes.
Our war chiefs still follow those trails to Chaco Canyon on a seasonal basis, where they offer prayers to that place. Since we've existed as Acoma people, that has continued. So I guess the multi-million-dollar question, and you know, I'm on the board of the Indigenous Environmental Network, so I work with all the folks in the Bakken oil fields, Candy Mossett, as you mentioned, Lauren White, her husband, and you know, it's like what's shifted from the Bakken is now in the Permian Basin of New Mexico. We've overtaken North Dakota as the #2 state oil producer in the United States. And again, that's not only pulled the wool over our indigenous leaders, our tribal governmental leaders, but our political governmental leaders in New Mexico. And again, it's those economics that become the divisive factor. New Mexico is a poor state. Right? And how do we get these governmental leaders at every level, from our tribal governments to our state governments to the Republican-controlled Congress, Republican-controlled Supreme Court, the Republican-controlled executive branch? You know, the next 4 years, we've got to really dig in, and I strongly support your efforts in this work that you're doing. And I'd just like to congratulate you, and you young people especially. You know, you're our future. So
Good, love.
My comments to less than a minute. I think how you stop this, right? What's gonna happen? I think action research as theorists, researchers, that's probably one of the ways. For some reason, you know, I'm the lead plaintiff in the Atencio versus the state of New Mexico for a violation of the Constitution of New Mexico that's supposed to guarantee a safe and healthful environment. I think that is part of it. That stems from that peacemaking. We're gonna make the peace. And it's action research, not theorizing, criticizing, philosophizing. Action research that has to do something. At least at this moment, I see that's pretty, at least for me, it's pretty powerful. And it's a call to arms for all of you.
Again, Manny, thank you so much for your words and your support over the years. Your question kind of hit me a little bit personally because you know, I might be a little vulnerable here, but you know, I've personally experienced my own tribal leaders turning their back on me when in doing this work and having direct attacks towards me or others of my staff members by the Republicans. And you know, that moment and that experience of not having the support from our leadership was very painful, but also just a reminder of how indoctrinated and colonized our systems have been over time. And so I've really leaned on the support of my peers and my elders, you know, like you, Manny, and Patush, and many other Pueblo community members that support this work, because ultimately we did not consent to the development and to the development of oil and gas. We did not consent to this issue of climate crisis that we've inherited
And so we have a right to express ourselves and our position, our political position, to how how the privatization of land and the industrial boom of resource extraction has impacted us. And so what I'm thinking about in terms of how do we get our leadership to like support the work, the grassroots work that we're doing. I mean, ultimately, I think one of the main reasons why we kept going with the development of public action lines was to build that capacity with our young people. Because our young people are going to be in those positions one day. They're going to be elders one day, and we're gonna be in that position where we are also going to have to reciprocate that support to young people in their advocacy, in their activism, in their participation culturally in their communities. And that's the role that we are going to inherit down the line. And so it may be the long game, but I think we've all come to terms with this idea and notion that, and this is something that I know our ancestors had also thought about, but we may not see the change that we are organizing towards in our lifetime. But that doesn't matter because it's not just about me, it's not just about us, it's about everything. Everything, you know, and I know there's indigenous terms that can encompass that worldview, but you know, in this, you know, in the way that I'm explaining it now, I just want to re-emphasize the importance of supporting young people, creating those intergenerational spaces where we can all learn and grow from each other. And yeah, let's dig into our values, and not turn our backs on each other, support each other. We don't always have to agree, but we can find some solace in knowing and understanding that the work that we're doing now is for everything.
Thank you for the words of encouragement. Of my work, my grandchildren really understand. And kitchen table discussion, what do you see? Loss of agricultural land, limited water. We might all have to live indoors 24 hours a day. Nature, the aspects, the natural aspects is really going to be degraded. And so that's basically the driving force that gets me up. And this Sunday I was out there in the area called Asasa, area called Cisna Cave. So I still walk the land, still touch the earth, still talk to nature, Mother Earth, the universe. And some people ask me, what are you going to do now? Because I'm still going to do what that, you can't do it alone. Guess what? I was out there alone before. And so, in that aspect, we move on. And to the next thoughts are, because of climate change, we need to repurpose pallets. Did we raise that garden? So in those aspects, then coalition members writing a new proposal to have them build those raised gardens at their own homes, and we go gather and have them show and then host elders, community members, how to do this new way of, gardening. And really, those things are, and then to also address, the alternative, modes of housing, because, in the latest drive through, the area, you know, those storage houses, they're sitting next to permanent homes because they can't get a home site lease. They can't get water to their own areas. And those, we have to really address those aspects and those initiatives on community development, community, infrastructure. One of the biggest things that really, Council Chapter, there's over $750,000 available for, power line. There's over, I can't even remember, but I think 250,000 to be the short run water line extension. And we can't get the right of way clearances from the BLM. And so there's this new thought of being purposely denying it. Or inactive, being inactive on those right of way requests while oil and gas doubles down on their well site. So those, things, it keeps the mind rolling, and how then we, address those. And so, yeah, we just keep going, we collaborate and develop, these new strategies to go forward. But thank you for your attendance, and hopefully it gives some ideas and join the coalition.
Real quick, I know we're running out of time.
Gladly, I wanted to thank the panel for everything you shared today too. I know I've attended a couple of these, but every time I learned something new. And while I was sitting here too, I couldn't help but also like think of what I learned from Dr. Harjo's talk as well, and thinking about this idea of relational infrastructure. And so that made me think about how Chaco itself is like relational infrastructure. You know, this is an area where our ancestors once lived and thrived, you know, and like there's so much that we learn today from Chaco that continues to, you know, guide us in this work. And, you know, and thinking about the title of the presentation today too, is talking about violence against the land, like violence against our people. But in the same way, if you flip that, healing the land is also healing our people. And like the work that you all have been doing to protect the land is protecting people, defending the land is defending our people. And so I'm just like kind of thinking, trying to be in a more optimistic place. Because I think as young people and youth in the movement, we're kind of forced to, you know, be optimistic and continue the fight that has been going since long before we got here. And so I also just wanted to take a chance to really quickly ask the panel, like, is there anything that Chaco has taught you in this fight to protect it that you carry with you? And if you could share how that's like motivated you and influences the work that you're gonna do beyond Chaco as well.
Try to do this up in a minute. For the chapter official, it really, what I learned is that all the things my family has done ever since before I could even remember all the cultural stuff is way more powerful than all the stuff, the schooling, all the training, all the intellectual training. That stuff has a deeper meaning than letters behind my name. And it ultimately, as you said, it can distort reality sometimes, some of the educational training. That's what I've learned. And the more and more we get we get tested and we're put into very compromising positions, intellectually, spiritually, come out a little bit stronger each time. And it really affirms a lot of this indigenous based thinking. And it be, okay, I say that knowing that it can become trite to say that, oh, I'm so indigenous, look at me, my resilience, right? No, it's affirms the realness. And it's very deeply personal, but I think that's what I've come to understand and come to hold and realize that, where we're going, things are happening. And however, when we get there, it's going to be beautiful. That's all I know.
Thank you, Maria. I know that Chaco is described as like ancestral ruins, but to me, Chaco is really our future because it's an example of an economy that is built around our values. And we are in this moment, and even in this conference, we're talking about what are the solutions? What are the solutions to the climate crisis or to language revitalization or community building or, all of the different issues that we deal with in Indian country today. What Chaco has taught me is that it is possible to build an economy around our values. And every single time I go to Chaco or a time where I'm taking new people within our organization or our fellowship to Chaco, every single time there's always a moment where there's a reimagining of what it was like in its prime. Dancing, singing, meetings in the kivas, all of that can happen if we work together to revitalize that economy. That's what Chaco has taught me, is that it's not a relic of the past. It really is our future.
Thank you for the question. And basically, it's that aspect of the landscape has a history. And then certain factors have taken us away from the boarding school era. For those folks that graduated from the boarding school, there was that relocation effort. Go to the cities, learn the trade, learn to live in the cities. And then now we have community members that are there based. They're the ones that basically says, do something. And so in that aspect, there is those values that emanate from the cultural sites from Chaco. Whether we know it or realize it, it comes here, it comes here. And so those aspects of resilience, those aspects of overcoming negative energies, that's the part that I think I for myself have experienced. I even had a journalist on a telephone interview. Have you ever seen a spirit? And I just says, that's a silly question. Let me pose one back to you. Have you ever seen an angel? And he says, no. Then afterwards, at the end of the interview, I'm sorry, I posed that really stupid question. So those types of things that we deal with, but in essence, our ancestors, they're the ones that can just think about it, do this. So in those aspects, it doesn't happen every day. They choose when they will touch us and they will give us thoughts. So those things, I think, is something that we have to value when those things occur. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and that was a beautiful ending, beautiful question to end on. One more round of applause for our panelists.
Before you go, Dr. Grant has been with us on the ground. As a grad student, learning about checkerboard area, deeply important to the movement. Research skills, unparalleled, writing skills. Dr. Grant has been there with us on the ground. I think allyship, that we didn't get there. I think Dr. Grant very much exemplifies that very idea of not just coming into community and being a vampire, sucking out all the intellectual property, but actually doing the research and doing this, still staying here, helping us write. And I think last couple of years ago, I said our scholarship needs to take a more pointed stance. And so Dr. Grant and I we're working on some of the infrastructure. I don't want to talk about the stuff we're up to just for the researchers in the room.
Yeah, stay tuned. We're working in partnership with several others on building out a digital archive of the fight to protect Greater Chaco. So hopefully in the coming year or two, you'll have access to an open access repository of, the incredible archive of this fight, and really highlighting community voices. So we're really looking forward to sharing that. It's just such an honor to work alongside you.